Rezavi for inviting me to this conference. Academically, this is my first visit to the university and to the center. 9 years ago, I came as a eager tourist, quickly making a tour on the cycle rickshaw and looking at all the buildings from outside. So while one has not been a student of this university, but ever since our graduation days, and especially after specializing in medieval Indian history, the influence of what has been called the Aligarh school has been very pervasive in all our lives. So indirectly we have been students of, I would be audacious enough to say that we've been indirect students of the Center for Advanced Studies. I shift the geographical focus a bit and I go to South India. And my paper will attempt to analyze the relationship between religious conflicts and urban conformations from 13th to the 19th century. It's a very long period that I've taken because I want to examine how the meaning of the conflict keeps changing. The context keeps changing and the way and the idea of conflict also keeps changing. And the location is Srirangam, a temple town of South India. Most of the sources that I've used here have been epigraphical evidence which are inscribed on the temple walls. They are mostly official records of donations. Then these are hagiographies which belong to Sri Vaishnava community, which is the dominant religious community of the town. It's temple chronicles and some archival records. Now a bit about Srirangam. This is not a great map, but it is situated here. And it's an island town situated in the district of Tiruchirappalli or Trichinopoly in Tamil Nadu. And it is surrounded by two rivers, Kaveri and Kolidam. Kolidam is a tributary of Kaveri on the north and the southern sides. Now, the settlement of Srirangam has two temples, the Ranganatha Swami temple dedicated to Vishnu and the Jambukeshwara temple dedicated to Shiva. Now, both the temples are important. This is what you can see, the river flowing past. Both the temples are very important pilgrimage centers for the Sri Vaishnava and the Shaiva community, and both of them claim an antiquated past approximately dating to 2000 to 3000 years ago. Now, however, the Ranganath Swami temple dedicated to Vishnu, this is the temple town, dominates the urban landscape of Srirangam because of its height, scale and its unique structural layout. In fact, the temple is synonymous with the town, and a study of Srirangam usually has revolved around the temple and its adjoining settlements. Now, in addition to history and urban planning of the temple and the town, we find that the way the religious communities developed, particularly the Sri Vaishnava community, it's intrinsically linked to the character of the town itself. Very briefly about who are the Sri Vaishnavas. They are followers of God Vishnu, and hence you have the Sri Vaishnava. The most important religious leader is Ramanuja, a medieval theologian who is dated between the 11th and the 12th century. He's supposed to have lived for 120 years, and he's accorded the status of a saint. I'm putting this very simplistically. He's actually called the Acharya. Today, the Sri Vaishnavas are divided into two sects, the Vadagalais, meaning the northerners, and they give precedence to Sanskrit Vedas over the Tamil hymns of the Alvars, who I think all of us know are the early Vaishnava saints, and are considered to be conservative. The second group are the Tengalais or the southerners, who give precedence to the Tamil hymns as the sacred language over the Sanskrit Vedas and are therefore considered to have a broader outlook. The 18th and the 19th century records register conflicts and tensions between the two sects over the control of the temple and the town. Now, why have I chosen Srirangam for the theme of this conference? Apart from the fact that this is my ongoing research where I'm trying to write a long history of the town is a very important symbol of the Hindu identity in South India. It figures in the political map of all the political parties in South India. H.D. Kumaraswamy, after he won and he became the chief minister of Karnataka, went to Srirangam to pay his respects. This is a constituency of, the late chief minister of, of Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha, and it occupies a very, very significant place in the Hindu identity today. Now, apart from its sacred character, there is a past, and that is the past which one is interested in. And this past is of a typical Hindu-Muslim antagonism, where the Turkish army in the 13th and the 14th century, who are the archetypes of the Muslim invaders, is supposed to have invaded, ransacked, and destroyed the temple that was finally restored during the Vijayanagar period with the king, the Sri Vaishnava community, and of course the great divine force of Vishnu. Now, presentation will examine such an interpretation and in addition raise certain questions. Now, did conflicts always and only engage the two religious communities, reduced to mostly what we call Hindus and Muslims, in medieval period in mutual antagonism? Did not conflict involve two communities who are today grouped under this broad, ubiquitous category of Hinduism? Did not conflict within a particular religious tradition create long-lasting fissures? In fact, medieval Indian history throws up numerous possibilities in which we can look at religious conflict. It is some of these possibilities that I propose to examine today. Now, I look at the first possibility about this town, where the conflict in this town is concerned, which is of course the Hindu-Muslim conflict and the urban syncretism, because the conflict led to a certain kind of an accommodation, and of course this has been eulogized as syncretism. And I think both need to be problematized, conflict and syncretism in this case. Now, next to the main sanctum sanctorum of God Ranganath, the presiding deity in the temple, there is a painting of one of the consorts of God, whose name is Thulukka Nachiyar. And as the name suggests, she was a Turkish princess who became the divine consort of Lord Ranganath. And this is how the painting looks like. All right. Thulukka literally means Turks and is also used for Muslims in the Tamil parlance today. And Nachiyar means a girl, and in this context, it also means a goddess. Now, the presence of a Muslim goddess in a Hindu temple has caused many to admire what is commonly perceived as a composite culture of Srirangam and the syncretic outlook of the Sri Vaishnava community. Thulukka Nachiyar is identified as a Turkish princess who came from Delhi in pursuit of God with whom she had fallen in love. Situated in the backdrops of the invasions of the Delhi Sultans, Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq in the 13th and 14th century, the travails of the princess in her journey from Delhi to Srirangam is also understood as her bhakti, as her devotion to God Ranganath. Now, the Koil Olugu, a temple chronicle of this particular temple, written around 16th and 17th century, narrates the invasion of the Tulukan or the Turkish Sultan, who's also called Dillishwara in the sources, that is the king of Delhi. And the Olugu or the record says that, Dillishwara ransacked the Srirangam town and the temple, carried away the loot, including the portable festival image, of the god Ranganath. Consequently, we are informed that festivals were suspended and the town became very desolate. Olugu then narrates the devotion of a temple servant, a woman who desired to restore the temple festivals and the temple and bring back the previous life into the town. She followed the Sultan's army incognito to Delhi to discover that the festival image is now with the daughter of the Sultan, who treats it like her lover. She immediately returned to Srirangam and informed the temple officials, who thereafter set to Delhi to recover the idol. After impressing upon the Sultan at Delhi, the temple officials and servants recovered the idol and embarked on an arduous journey to Srirangam. Finding that the image is not in Delhi, the princess became delirious with grief. Pining for her lover, she went after the temple retinue, accompanied by the soldiers. Thereafter, Olugu gives a very adventurous account of how soldiers, along with the princess and the Turkish army on hot pursuit, finally reached Srirangam via Tirupati, another Sri Vaishnava sacred center, and reinstated the temple image in the temple so that the festivals could resume. The princess reaches the temple, sees the image, and finally merges with it. The Olugu ends the narrative with the information that the shrine of a sultani next to Sanctum Sanctorum of the presiding deity was constructed. Significantly, the shrine is located on the path through which the procession of devotees pass during various festivals. Now, this is roughly the story which we find being written. Now, often seen as a Hindu-Muslim tension, and finally a resolution of the tension through an accommodation in the Hindu temple, scholars, and very lately, because there is a trend of writing, history for laymen, popular history, very lately Manu Pillai, have usually understood the establishment of the shrine of Thulukka Nachiyar as an attempt to integrate the Muslim population of Srirangam and the nearby town of Trichy, who have been visiting this area very regularly. Now, further appreciation is expressed, by these modern scholars in the annual celebration of the ritual marriage of Ranganath with Nachiyar as a festival. In addition, Ranganath, receives daily offerings of rotis, somehow in the Tamil sense considered as a North Indian dish, and even wears colored lungis to please the Muslim princess. Now, was this accommodation and negotiation so exceptional as we would like to think today? Was this a resolution of the so-called Hindu-Muslim religious conflict which transformed the urban outlook of Srirangam, as it now provided space to increasing Arab Muslim trading population, particularly from the 14th century, since the town was becoming a very important trading center, because it's related at the cusp of two rivers very close to the Coromandel coast. However, certain issues need to be pointed out, which will help us to understand, the legend, and will help us to understand the fact that the legend was not a clash of civilizations, rather reflected a complex interaction within the Sri Vaishnava community, and not outside it, and was situated in the Vijayanagar political culture. While it is true that the invasions of Delhi Sultanate in 14th century may have temporarily disrupted the worship in the temple at Srirangam, but whether the events described in the Olugu regarding temple destruction, looting, especially of the festival image, and finally the latter's reinstallation as a shrine in the temple, it is a bit difficult to assess. After all, Olugu was written and compiled in the 16th and 17th century and was recording incidents which had taken place approximately 200 to 300 years ago. It should be noted that the first documentation of the invasion of, Thulukkan Sultan, that is because we don't have any names in our sources, the first documentation is in the early Sri Vaishnava hagiographies written in the 13th and the 14th centuries. Around the same time, perhaps when the invasion took place, or maybe a little later to the invasions. However, interestingly, in these hagiographies, it was not the Ranganatha Swami temple at Srirangam, which is in the Koil Olugu version, that was ransacked by the Turks. It was rather another temple which is called the Narayan Swami temple, located in Melkote, which is in Karnataka, 240 miles northwest of Srirangam, that has been documented to have been attacked. Now further, the temple of the temple servants of Srirangam, as we find in the Olugu, they were not the heroes. The hero was Ramanuja, who's located in the 10th and the 11th century, and of course he's the most important leader of the Sri Vaishnava community, who was the savior of the festival image. It is important to note that Ramanuja lived from, in the 10th and the 11th century, and invasions of Alauddin Khulji took place between 1296 and 1310, And the next set of northern Turkish invasions were led by Muhammad bin Tughlaq in the 14th century. Therefore, under no circumstances, the invasions could have preceded Ramanuja or taken place during his time period. Ramanuja, under no circumstances, would have encountered Alauddin Khalji or Muhammad bin Tughlaq or the ill-famed Turkish army. This was clearly the hagiographer's sleight of hands in putting together events which were otherwise anachronistic. Now, why were they doing it? They also, I'm sure, these are very intelligently crafted texts, so they also know what they are doing. Now, what is the design behind, putting anachronistic events together and making the hero out of Ramanuja and the Sri Vaishnava community? Now, the answer lies actually in the broader textual world of the medieval and early modern South Indian culture, one that finds that the invasions of the Turks were emerging as significant literary tropes in various political narratives. In these narratives, the heroes were chiefs and petty rulers who were shown to be inflicting ignominious defeat upon the Delhi Sultan, who's been referred as Yavana, Thulukka, and Turushkas. Now, commissioned by various political groups aspiring for power against the background of an unstable political situation in South India in 13th century, because the Cholas had declined, Vijayanagar had yet to come in. The invasion motive was a means of portraying a successful dominant ideology which buttressed the defeat of a powerful enemy and the establishment of a powerful political and moral order, especially restoring the temple calendar. Now, the political narratives composed in the reign of the Vijayanagar rulers also, followed this trope and in fact elaborated upon this trope. Thereafter, we find that various ruling aspirant groups of the 16th and the 17th century, in their eagerness to show themselves as legitimate successors of the Vijayanagar Empire, commissioned such texts. Thus, the narratives in the hagiographies and temple chronicles, including Koilolugu, drew upon these political narratives and recasted the events within the frame of devotion and Sri Vaishnava community. Now, by projecting a shared past when both, that is the rulers and the Sri Vaishnavas, had to confront a common enemy, who's the Tulukas, the texts conveyed an impression of a collective historical experience to attract patronage. Such narratives associated with Ramanuja and his heroism became the template of the hagiographical narrative in the subsequent periods, and the Sri Vaishnava religious leaders tried, who wanted to have a genealogical connection with Ramanuja, also replaced Ramanuja as the savior of the festival image. Now, this became particularly important for legitimizing the claims over temple resources, disciples' patronage, where respective, groups claimed the, control over them. Now, there are two more sacred centers apart from Melkote and Srirangam where this, Thulukka Nachiyar figures in. One is in Tirupati, and the other is in Vandiyur, and Vandiyur is 76 miles south of Srirangam. Now, in these two places, Thulukka Nachiyar is actually not coming from north. She is not coming as a part of the invading troop. She is a local princess of various tribes. Large number of them followed several Islamic traditions. Thus, her accommodation as a goddess in the Vishnu temples of these places meant an accommodation of the tribes into the frame of a Hindu temple. It should be noted that all these centers where the Thulukka Nachiyar myth figures, Srirangam, Melkote, Vandiyur and Tirupati, were also a part of the Sri Vaishnava pilgrimage network, and several prominent Sri Vaishnava leaders traveled in these areas and attracted devotees who were mostly warrior groups. Now, besides these warrior groups, we find that these were also dry upland regions, and Srirangam was a fertile area located in the Kaveri zone. So, in many ways, all these regions were networked together, and there was a circulation of myths and legends within this network. Now, the fact is that, therefore, it seems from the sources, it is not the religious conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims that was the backdrop of the Thulukka Nachiyar shrine at Srirangam. Today it is often cited, and syncretism as well as conflict is portrayed as a part of a cultural historical heritage which has dangerous ramifications. Rather, the expansion of the sphere of religious interaction and the growing social and political context of Srirangam, which drew people from various parts, and created a certain kind of an urban conformity, lay, at heart of some of the important conflicts which took place. Now, by Vijayanagar period, Srirangam had become a very, very cosmopolitan town, despite the fact that it was a temple town. But we have, inscriptions recorded in various languages like the Marathis, Telugu, Kannada, and so on. So there was a diverse demographic composition in Srirangam. Now, various political groups came in, they instituted services within the temple. Large number of land grants were being made to expand the agricultural hinterland of the temple, and various financial transactions were also done, and we find that large number of architectural innovations were made, which actually makes today the town an architectural classic. Now, we find that amidst this kind of a social dynamism where different groups are coming in, different political groups, social groups, and religious groups are coming in, the Sri Vaishnava community also broadened its social outlook. Now, it began to integrate both the Tamil hymns of the Alvars and the Sanskrit Vedic hymns within the single framework of a community, which was an idea to project egalitarian, not an egalitarian community, but an all-inclusive community which would represent Brahmins and the other social groups. So amidst this, we find that a large number of these groups became a part of the devotees of various Sri Vaishnava leaders who emerged during this period. And we have various monastic families with their heads competing with each other over rights and resources of the temple. So there was a clamor for devotees and through the devotees to control the temple resources. Now, in such a competitive environment, conflict was bound to take place. And we find that our inscriptions as well as other sources record a very important part of the conflicts, and those conflicts are not only within the community but also with the Shaiva community which had a temple nearby. I would like to recount, just 2 minutes. I would like to recount one incident where a festival procession was going on, and it kind of trespassed the Shaiva boundary, and the matter became so volatile and vitriolic that everybody had to move to Hampi to appeal to the Vijayanagar ruler to intervene. And finally, of course, it was intervened, in this period. When this is the situation which kind of existed till the 18th century, till the British came on the scene. Now, the context of the conflict changes, and to put it very briefly, after which I just conclude, we find that the British tried to take over the control of the temple and eliminate the authority of these leaders. Which of course created another set of tensions, and temple offices were auctioned, and it is at this moment that we find that there was a need to establish certain kind of a uniformity between the different sectarian identities. Hence, what happens is that those Sri Vaishnavas who were already affiliated to the Sanskritic tradition came together and were called Vadagalais, and those Sri Vaishnavas who were affiliated to the Tamil tradition were actually called Tenkalais. And throughout the 19th and the 20th century, we have conflicts between the two which are vitriolic, so vitriolic that the cases went to the Privy Council in Britain. Now, amidst all these religious, conflicts, the British, issued various settlement documents which finally transformed the character of the town into a uniform Tengalai, setup. Thus, what began as a diverse, vibrant, kind of social dispensation in this entire town, we find has now become a uniform Tengalai town where the other groups like the Vadagalais were not even allowed to enter. And these disputes take place as late as 1950s. Now, to conclude, therefore, the analysis of religious conflicts and their ramifications on the urban conformations in the town of Srirangam clearly show that the town had a certain diversity with multiple traditions, and it is now transformed into a homogeneous singular identity. It is contended here that religious conflicts in history also imply negotiations, accommodation, and mutual cooperation, all of which involved a range of historical actors, the state, the various political groups, and social groups of different communities. In addition, the issues of conflict and negotiations differ over a historical span and acquire varying meanings and importance at different points of time. Thank you.
What surprised me was, the placement of the claim that, she was the daughter of a Muslim Sultan from North.
Yeah.
Was there any sizable population to which they were factoring at that time?
Well, there are two things. But I think we should, in my opinion, because when I look at the sources, it's for us, we start imagining in terms of communities interacting and being accommodated. I think the concern was not the Arab population at all. The concern was more within the communities to establish a certain kind of a patronage network, where they would claim themselves to be a part of that so-called trauma. I mean, I don't want to use the word trauma, but the so-called, defeat which their own rulers suffered. So it is in that which is located. It is located within that network. But the belief is very strong. Outlook 2 years ago carried an article about this place as being something which is, which is very modern, which is very syncretic. Now, syncretism also has a flip side, which means there was a conflict preceding to that, which can be used, and in today's time, it is a very volatile motive. So, in all the sources that one has read, there is, of course, a reference to her being the daughter of Dillishwara. We don't have the name of the ruler. We are making these connections because who could it be? We are making these connections with the political narratives. So we assume that they are, probably Alauddin Khalji's invasion to Deccan, because that is when the first time, 13th, 14th century is the first time in the texts that we see this kind of a description coming about. Secondly, I feel that this incident or this narrative is a bit overrated, because when we look at the sources, for example, the hagiographies where they figure first, in those, the sources have a different motive. Their motive is not to talk about, such conflicts and, accommodations. The hagiographies have a purpose, and the purpose is to project their, their religious leader as the greatest. Now, in that context, this incident is actually very small. Religious leader and the god, both, because the god is missing, and Ramanuja says, okay, the god is missing, the festivals can't be held, it's a desolate place, so what do we do? So the god comes in his dream. I mean, there are these details, and the god says, I am in Delhi, you go there. So he goes with his people to Delhi, and there are various versions of the event that he meets the Delhi Sultan, and the Delhi Sultan is, of course, very impressed with Ramanuja, and he opens the treasury to him and says, pick up, where is your idol? So Ramanuja doesn't find it there. Then again he has a dream, and then the god says, I'm in the chamber of the princess, the Nachiyar, so you take it from there. So and then he goes to the Sultan. Sultan says, fine, take it, not realizing the effect it would have on her, on his daughter. So these are the way the stories are woven. But if you look at any of these hagiographies, they form a very small portion of all the activities of these religious leaders and the glory of the god. The focus, is not on the narrative so much. It is actually on how, the Sri Vaishnava community is busy engaging with the Advaita of Shankara, and the Shankara tradition which preceded. So, which followed, subsequently. The fight is actually with the Advaitins and the Sri Vaishnava community, which is a Vishishta Advaita community. This is a very small portion, but historiography and has, and of course, a certain kind of a popular perception has, through newspapers, etc., has projected this incident a bit too much. I personally, and it figures in history books. I mean, everybody writes about it. Richard Davis has an entire article on it, though he also is not very confident about over stressing upon this narrative. I talked about Manu Pillai, who's written this recent book From Rebels to Sultans, and he's now one of the most the newspaper Quint has called him one of the 20th most 20 most influential idol or public intellectuals in the country today. They all glorify this, and I think it's a bit exaggerated. There's no need to do that. It's not an important part of the sources.
Thank you. Content about epigraphical sources, and it is all speaking about 12th and 13th to 18th and 19th century. Do you find any epigraphical support to this, or this is totally based on only the Koilorgu? Because I feel this is nothing but a sort of local conflict between the Vadakalai and Tenkalai, and finally the Tenkalai succeeding.
Yeah, the sources don't temple by Vijayanagar General Gopanna. After the invasion, that reference is there. But it's just there that, Gopanna came here and, he came here and reinstalled the idol. That's it, Beyond that, we don't have. So there are 2 to 3 inscriptions which just refer to the restoration of the temple. But it does not talk at all about this,